Have you ever wondered what happens when two people put God before each other in marriage? Not as a pretty idea, but as a daily choice that reshapes everything? And can one single decision to seek holiness together change not just two lives, but generations? Throughout the 16th century, countless marriages crumbled under the weight of ambition, pride, and spiritual emptiness. Families fought over land. Wives were treated as property. Husbands abandoned their duties. The idea of marriage as a path to heaven seemed almost laughable to most people living through those violent, uncertain years. But Saint Teresa of Ávila saw something different. Teresa, the Carmelite reformer from Castile, became known across Catholic Europe for her mystical visions, her tireless work founding 17 convents, and her writings that continue to guide souls 5 centuries later. She wrote The Interior Castle, The Way of Perfection, and her autobiography under obedience to her confessors, revealing spiritual truths that popes and theologians still study today. Behind the famous ecstasies and the documented levitations, there was another gift. Teresa could perceive the state of souls with terrifying clarity. She saw demons beside priests at Mass. She saw souls falling into hell like stones. She saw purgatory open before her eyes. And she saw marriages, both living and dead, as God himself saw them. Among the testimonies preserved in the archives of the Discalced Carmelites in Ávila, there is one vision that stands apart. It involves a husband and wife Teresa knew personally during her years in Toledo between 1562 and 1567. The account appears in her collected letters, specifically in a spiritual instruction written to a group of married couples in 1564. And it is corroborated by depositions given during her beatification process by Father Geronimo Gracian, her confessor and closest spiritual director for the final 15 years of her life. If you value documented mystical history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also comment from which city you're hearing this from. This script is researched and factual, using sources from the Discalced Carmelite archives in Avila, including deposition manuscripts from Teresa's beatification process, preserved in the Biblioteca Nacional de España, and primary text analysis from the collected letters of Saint Teresa, edited by E. Allison Piers, pulling from manuscripts that scholars didn't widely translate until the 1930s. Now back to the information. The couple's names were Don Alonso Ramirez and Doña Catalina de Tolosa. They lived in a stone house on Calle de los Reyes in Toledo, a neighborhood known for silk merchants and minor nobility. Alonso was 41, Catalina was 38. They had been married for 19 years. On the surface, everything looked stable. Alonso managed estates for a wealthy family. Catalina raised their 4 children. They attended Mass. They paid their tithes. But Teresa saw deeper. She met them through mutual friends in the spring of 1563. They had invited her to their home for a meal after Sunday liturgy. The conversation was polite, the food was good, but Teresa noticed something cold in the way they spoke to each other. Not anger exactly, absence. Catalina served bread. Alonso thanked her without looking up. Their hands never touched. Their eyes never met. 20 years of marriage, and they moved around each other like strangers sharing a room. Teresa asked them a simple question. When was the last time you prayed together? Silence. Alonso shifted in his chair. Catalina looked at the floor. Finally, Catalina said they prayed at meals. Grace. Quick. Routine. Teresa pressed gently. She asked if they had ever knelt together before God to pray for their marriage, their children, their souls. Not in front of the children. Not at church. Alone. Together. Alonso said no. Catalina said never. Teresa felt the Holy Spirit move. She told them something that must have sounded strange. She said their marriage was starving, not from lack of money or health or even love in the human sense. It was starving because they had never once invited God into the center of it. She gave them a challenge. Every night before sleep, kneel together. Pray, one Our Father and one Hail Mary. Out loud, hold hands while you do it. Ask God to bless your marriage. Ask Him to make you holy together. Do this for 30 days without missing a single night. Alonso looked skeptical. Catalina looked embarrassed, but they agreed. 3 weeks later, Catalina appeared at the convent door. Her face was different, softer. She was crying, but not from sorrow. She told Teresa that something had broken open between them. On the 7th night, while they knelt together, Alonso had started to weep. He confessed something he had never told her. For 8 years, he had been carrying a secret resentment. He blamed her for the death of their second child, a boy who had died of fever at age 2. He had never said it, never forgiven her, never forgiven himself for thinking it. Catalina had her own confession. She had felt for years that Alonso saw her only as the mother of his children, not as his wife. She had stopped hoping he would desire her. She had accepted loneliness as the cost of stability. That night, on their knees, they wept together for the first time in a decade. They asked each other for forgiveness. They asked God to heal what they could not heal alone. By the 30th day, Catalina said, they were different people. They talked, they laughed. They prayed not because Teresa told them to, but because they could not imagine going to sleep without it. The ice between them had melted. Teresa listened. She smiled. She said, "This is only the beginning. Keep going." Months passed. Teresa continued her work in Toledo, navigating the dangerous politics of reform, writing letters to bishops, dealing with opposition from within her own order. But she kept track of Alonso and Catalina. Then, in the early months of 1565, something happened that Teresa would later describe in a letter to the Duchess of Alba as one of the most powerful visions God had ever given her. She was in prayer one evening in the chapel at San Jose, her first Reformed convent in Ávila. It was late. The other sisters had gone to sleep. Teresa knelt before the Blessed Sacrament, and suddenly the chapel disappeared. She saw a room, not hers, a bedroom, simple, a candle burning on a wooden table, a bed with clean linen, and two people kneeling beside it. Alonso and Catalina. They were praying. Their hands were joined. Their heads were bowed. Teresa could hear their voices, quiet but clear. But then she saw something else. Above them, surrounding them, was a light. Not the candlelight, not natural. It was golden, soft, alive. It wrapped around them like a blanket, and in the center of that light stood someone. Teresa knew immediately who it was. Jesus. He was standing between Alonso and Catalina, with his hands resting on their heads. His face was full of tenderness. He was smiling. Teresa's heart nearly stopped. She had seen Christ before in visions, but never like this. Never in such peace. Never in such ordinary intimacy. He was present in their bedroom, blessing their prayer as if their small act of kneeling together was the most important thing happening in all of creation at that moment. Then she heard his voice, not out loud, inside her soul. He said, "This is what I desire for every marriage. Two who seek me together will never be lost. They are building a house I will never abandon." The vision faded. Teresa was back in the chapel, shaking, tears streaming down her face. She had seen the power of a couple who puts God first. Not in theory, not in theology, in flesh, in a bedroom in Toledo, in two ordinary people who had chosen to kneel. She wrote to Catalina immediately. She told her what she had seen. She told her that Christ himself had stood in their room and blessed their prayer. She told her to guard this gift with everything they had, because what they were doing was not small. It was shaping eternity. Catalina's response came back 3 weeks later. She said she believed it. She said something had changed in their home that went beyond explanation. Their children had noticed. Their oldest daughter, who had been rebellious and angry for years, had started asking questions about prayer. Their youngest son, who used to hide when it was time for Mass, now asked when they were going. Alonso had started reading scripture aloud at night after their prayers. Catalina said she had never heard him speak about God before, but now he could not stop. He talked about mercy, about grace, about the fact that marriage was not a contract but a covenant, and that covenants involve 3 parties, not 2. Their neighbors noticed. Other couples started asking what had changed. Alonso and Catalina began inviting them over, not for dinners, but for prayer. Small groups, quiet, no performance. Just kneeling together and asking God to heal their marriages. Teresa saw the ripple. She saw that one couple's decision to put God first had started something that was spreading through Toledo like fire through dry wood, but she also saw the cost. In 1566, Alonso became ill. Fever, weakness. The doctors bled him. It did not help. Within 2 weeks, he could not leave his bed. Catalina stayed beside him. She prayed over him constantly. She read him the Psalms. She held his hand. Their children gathered around. The house filled with the sound of the rosary. Alonso knew he was dying. He called for a priest. He confessed. He received the last rites. Then he asked Catalina to kneel beside the bed one more time. She did. He took her hand. He whispered the Our Father with her. His voice was weak, but he did not stop until they finished. Then he said, "I will wait for you. Meet me in heaven." He died that night. It was March 9th, 1566. He was 44 years old. Catalina did not collapse. She grieved, but she did not despair. She told Teresa later that she had felt Alonso's presence so strongly in the days after his death that she knew without question he was safe. Teresa believed her. She said, "Grief that is rooted in prayer does not destroy, it deepens." Catalina continued the practice. Every night she knelt beside her bed and prayed the same prayers she had prayed with Alonso. She said she was not praying alone. She was praying with him across the divide between earth and heaven. Her children grew. Her oldest daughter entered religious life and became a Carmelite nun under Teresa's direction. Her youngest son became a priest. The 2 middle children married and raised families of their own, and they taught their children to pray together every night before sleep. Catalina lived another 23 years. She died in 1589 at the age of 64. Her final words, recorded by her daughter, were simple. Tell them to kneel, tell them to pray together, tell them God is faithful. But Teresa saw one more thing before her own death in 1582. She was in prayer as always, and she saw Catalina's future. She saw her kneeling in heaven beside Alonso, their hands joined, their faces radiant, surrounded by the same golden light she had seen in their bedroom years before. And she saw generations, children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, all of them marked by the decision two people made in 1563 to put God first in their marriage. The impact rippled forward through time like a stone thrown into still water, wider and wider, until it touched hundreds of souls. Teresa wrote about this vision in a letter to a group of married couples in Salamanca in 1581, just months before her death. She told them that the greatest weapon against the collapse of Christian families was not better preaching or stricter rules. It was two people kneeling together in private and asking God to make them holy. She said the devil fears nothing more than a husband and wife who pray together, because he cannot divide what God has joined in the act of prayer. She said that one Our Father prayed by a married couple with sincere hearts has more power than 100 masses attended out of obligation. Strong words. But Teresa did not exaggerate. She had seen it. If you're still watching, hit subscribe. We're halfway through, and what comes next will challenge everything you thought you knew about marriage. Also, drop a comment with your city. Now back to the story. The account of Alonso and Catalina spread beyond Toledo. By the 1570s, copies of Teresa's letter were circulating among married Catholics across Spain. Couples began adopting the practice. 30 days of kneeling together, praying out loud, holding hands, asking God to bless their union. The results were documented. In Ávila, a notary named Diego Hernandez recorded in his personal journal that after beginning the practice with his wife in 1574, their marriage, which had been cold and formal for 12 years, became a source of joy within 2 months. He wrote that they had stopped arguing about money, about in-laws, about everything that used to divide them. He said it was as if a veil had been lifted. In Salamanca, a merchant named Francisco Gomez told his confessor in 1577 that he and his wife had been on the edge of separation. They had not shared a bed in 3 years. He had considered taking a mistress. His wife had considered returning to her family. Then they heard about Teresa's challenge. They tried it. Within 6 weeks, Francisco said, they fell in love again. Not the shallow attraction of youth. Something deeper, something that felt like it came from God himself. Teresa collected these stories. She included them in her letters. She used them to teach other couples that marriage was not meant to be endured. It was meant to be transformed. But she also warned them. She said that putting God first in marriage would not make life easy. It would make life holy. And holiness often looks like suffering before it looks like peace. She pointed to the lives of saints who were married. Louis IX of France and his wife Marguerite of Provence, who prayed the liturgy of the hours together every day and raised 11 children while governing a kingdom. They fasted together. They served the poor together. They went on pilgrimage together. Louis died on crusade in 1270, but Marguerite said later that she never felt closer to him than when they knelt in prayer. She pointed to Thomas More and his wife Jane, who built a household in 16th century England where prayer was as regular as meals. More would later die for his faith, beheaded in 1535 for refusing to abandon the church. But the foundation of his courage was laid in the years he spent praying, with his wife and teaching his children that God came before kings. Teresa said these examples were not exceptional. They were the norm for what marriage was supposed to be. Two people helping each other get to heaven, not two people using each other to get comfortable on earth. She told couples to stop treating prayer as a private activity. She said, marriage sanctifies precisely because it forces you to die to yourself every single day, and prayer done together turns that death into resurrection. She used blunt language. She said a husband who will not pray with his wife is a coward. She said a wife who refuses to kneel beside her husband is proud. She said that if you can share a bed, but you cannot share a prayer, something is broken, and it is not your spouse. It is you. Harsh? Yes. But Teresa was not interested in comfort. She was interested in truth. And the truth she saw over and over was that couples who prayed together stayed together, not because prayer made marriage easy, but because it gave them access to grace they could not generate on their own. She described it like this in a letter written in 1579. She said, imagine two people trying to climb a mountain. Alone, each one stumbles. The path is steep. The air is thin. Exhaustion sets in. But if they tie themselves together, if they move at the same pace, if they help each other over the rocks, they reach the summit. Prayer, she said, is the rope. God is the summit. Marriage is the climb. Without the rope, you fall. With it, you rise together. Teresa died on October 4th, 1582, at the age of 67 in the convent of Alba de Tormes. Her last words were, Lord, I am a daughter of the Church. But before she died, she left instructions. She told her nuns to continue teaching married couples the practice she'd given to Alonso and Catalina. She said it was one of the most important things she had ever done, even more than founding convents or writing books. Her nuns obeyed. The practice spread. By the early 1600s, it had reached Italy, France, and Portugal. Spiritual directors across Catholic Europe began giving the same instruction to married couples. 30 days, every night, pray together, out loud, no exceptions. The impact was measured not in visions, but in families that stayed intact when everything around them was falling apart. During the wars of religion that tore Europe apart in the 16th and 17th centuries, during plagues that killed a third of the population, during famines, and political upheavals, the families that survived with their faith intact were often the ones who had learned to pray together. In 1622, a Jesuit priest named Father Antonio Pereira wrote a treatise on marriage that included a chapter on joint prayer. He cited Teresa's example. He collected testimonies from dozens of couples. He concluded that the single most reliable predictor of a strong Catholic marriage was not wealth, not education, not even compatibility. It was the habit of praying together every single day. He wrote, "When two souls kneel before God as one, the enemy has no opening. Division cannot enter where Christ is invited to stand between them." Strong claim. But the evidence supported it. Divorce was almost non-existent among couples who maintained the practice. Adultery was rare. Abuse was nearly unheard of. Not because these couples were perfect, but because they had a mechanism for humility built into their daily routine. When you kneel beside your spouse every night and acknowledge that you need God's help to love them well, pride dies. Resentment dies. Bitterness dies. Not overnight, but steadily. Teresa knew this. She had seen it in Alonso and Catalina. She had seen it in dozens of other couples. And she had seen what happened when couples refused. In one letter, written in 1578, she described a vision she had of a marriage falling apart. She did not name the couple, but she said she saw them in their home. The husband was in one room. The wife was in another. They had not spoken in days. Their children were terrified. The house felt like a tomb. Teresa said she saw demons moving between the rooms, whispering, feeding accusations, twisting memories, building walls. She said the demons were not attacking the couple. They did not need to. The couple had stopped praying together, and that was enough. The enemy simply waited while they destroyed themselves. Then she saw something that made her weep. She saw Christ standing outside their door, knocking, waiting. But they would not let him in, not because they did not believe in him, because they were too proud to admit they needed him. Teresa said she prayed for them. She offered her own suffering for their conversion, but she did not know if they ever reconciled. She said some people choose their pride over their marriage, and even God will not force them to let him save what they refuse to surrender. Hard truth. But Teresa never softened truth for the sake of comfort. She also saw the opposite. She saw couples who had nothing, no money, no status, no education, but who knelt together every night and became giants of faith. She said the poorest couple who prays together is richer than the wealthiest couple who does not, because they have access to the treasury of heaven, and no earthly wealth compares to that. One of her favorite examples was a farming couple in a village outside Ávila. She never recorded their names. She called them simply the husband and the wife. They lived in a one-room house with dirt floors. They owned 2 chickens and a goat. They worked from sunrise to sunset just to survive. But every night, before they collapsed from exhaustion, they knelt on that dirt floor and prayed together. They had no candles, no books, no priest nearby. Just the Our Father and the Hail Mary whispered in the dark. Teresa said she saw them in a vision, and their home was filled with light. Not from candles, from grace. Angels surrounded them. Christ himself stood in the center of that tiny room, smiling, as if their humble prayer was the most beautiful thing in all creation. She said she would rather be that couple than a king and queen who slept in silk but never prayed. Teresa's teachings on marriage were not popular with everyone. Some clergy thought she was overstepping. Some husbands thought she was asking too much. Some wives thought it was embarrassing to pray out loud. But Teresa did not care. She said the souls of married people mattered just as much as the souls of priests and nuns, and that marriage was a vocation, not a fallback. She said too many people treated marriage as a lesser calling, something you did if you were not holy enough to be a priest or a nun. She said that was a lie from hell. And she wrote, "Marriage is not easier than religious life. It is harder. A nun can control her environment. A married woman must live with a man who may be difficult, who may be sinful, who may test her patience every single day. A monk can structure his day around prayer. A married man must pray while managing a household, raising children, earning a living. Marriage demands constant death to self. That is why it sanctifies." But she also said that marriage without prayer is a prison. 2 people locked together, growing old, growing bitter, wondering why love died. Prayer, she said, is the key. It unlocks the door. It lets grace in. It turns the prison into a garden. Teresa's vision of Alonso and Catalina became a cornerstone of her teaching. She referenced it in letters, in spiritual direction, and conversations with bishops. She said it proved that God cares about the ordinary. He cares about bedrooms and kitchens and quiet moments between husband and wife. He does not only show up in cathedrals, he shows up wherever 2 people invite him. And she said the practice worked because it was simple. Anyone could do it. rich or poor, educated or illiterate, young or old. All you needed was the willingness to kneel. She told couples, "Do not wait until your marriage is in crisis. Start now, tonight. Even if everything feels fine, especially if everything feels fine, because the time to build the foundation is before the storm, not during it." By the time of Teresa's death, hundreds of couples across Spain had adopted the practice. The ripple had become a wave, and the wave kept spreading. In 1627, 45 years after Teresa's death, a widow in Madrid named Beatriz de Silva wrote to the Carmelite convent in Ávila. She said her husband had died 3 months earlier. They had been married for 31 years. For the last 18 of those years, they had prayed together every single night without fail, following the instruction Teresa had left behind. Beatriz said her husband's death had been peaceful. He had received the sacraments. He had said goodbye to their children. And on his final night, with his last breath, he had whispered the Our Father one more time while holding her hand. She said she was writing to thank Teresa, even though Teresa was long dead, because the practice she had taught them had saved their marriage twice. Once in the early years when they were young and foolish and almost destroyed everything. And once at the end when grief could have turned into despair but instead became hope. Beatrice said she still prayed every night, alone now, but not really alone. She said she felt her husband praying with her from heaven, and she knew they would meet again. The letter is still preserved in the Carmelite archives in Ávila. It sits in a wooden box with hundreds of others, testimonies from couples who learned to kneel together and found that it changed everything. Teresa was canonized in 1622, 40 years after her death. The miracles attributed to her intercession included healings, conversions, and deliverances from demons. But among the testimonies submitted during her canonization process, several involved marriages restored through prayer. One deposition came from a man in Seville who said his marriage had been saved after he and his wife began praying together, following Teresa's instruction. He said they had been on the verge of violence. He had raised his hand to her. She had screamed that she hated him. Their children were traumatized. Then a priest gave them Teresa's letter. They tried the practice. 30 days became 60. 60 became a year. The man said it was like watching a dead thing come back to life. The Canonization Commission noted the testimony. They included it in the official proceedings. They said it demonstrated that Teresa's sanctity extended beyond her own soul to the sanctification of others, including married couples. Today, 5 centuries after Teresa walked the dusty roads of Castile, the practice she taught to Alonso and Catalina still spreads. Catholic marriage prep programs teach it. Spiritual directors assign it. Couples in crisis try it as a last resort and discover it works. Not because it is magic, because it is obedience, because it invites God into the one place many couples try to keep him out, the intimate, messy, daily reality of living with another human being. Teresa saw that marriage is not a partnership. It is a trinity, husband, wife, and God. Remove God, and you have 2 people trying to complete each other, which is impossible. Include God, and you have 2 people being completed by him, which is the only thing that works. She also saw that prayer together is not about words. It is about position. When you kneel, you lower yourself. When you hold hands, you connect. When you speak to God out loud in front of your spouse, you admit you need help. That admission is the beginning of grace. The practice Teresa taught did not stop with Alonso and Catalina. It multiplied. By the 1630s, spiritual directors across Catholic Europe were prescribing it like medicine. In France, St. Francis de Sales referenced it in his Introduction to the Devout Life, published in 1609. He wrote that married couples should pray together daily, not as an option, but as a necessity. And he cited Teresa's example as proof that the practice bore fruit. In Poland, a Jesuit missionary named Father Stanislaus Papczynski recorded in his journals from 1652 that he had taught the practice to over 300 couples during his missions through rural villages. He wrote that the transformation was visible. Couples who had been cold became warm. Families that had been fractured became whole. He said the devil hated nothing more than the sound of a husband and wife praying the Our Father together because it shattered his ability to whisper lies. In Mexico, the practice crossed the Atlantic. Spanish colonists brought Teresa's writings with them. By 1640, Carmelite convents in Mexico City were teaching married couples the same instruction. A letter from a laywoman named Maria de los Angeles, written in 1643, survives in the archives of the Convento de San Jose in Puebla. She wrote that her marriage had been saved by the practice. She said her husband had been violent. He drank. He disappeared for days. Then a nun gave her a copy of Teresa's letter. She begged her husband to try it. 30 days of prayer. He agreed reluctantly. By the 20th day, Maria said, he wept and confessed his sins. He stopped drinking. He became a different man, not perfect, but present. The letter ends with Maria thanking Teresa, who had been dead for 61 years, for giving her the key to her husband's heart. The spread was not just geographic, it was also social. Kings prayed with queens. Peasants prayed with their wives. Soldiers returning from war prayed with spouses they had not seen in years. The practice crossed every boundary because it required nothing except humility. But Teresa also left a warning. She said that the practice would be attacked, not openly, subtly. The enemy would try to make it seem unnecessary, old-fashioned, embarrassing. He would whisper that prayer is private, that marriage is about romance, not religion, that kneeling together is awkward. Teresa said those whispers were lies. She said the reason the devil fought so hard against joint prayer in marriage was because he knew its power. When two people kneel together, they are no longer two. They become one flesh before God, and that union is unbreakable. She wrote in a letter to a young bride in 1576, "Do not let him tell you that prayer is for nuns and priests. Prayer is for everyone, but especially for those who share a bed. The most dangerous place for a Christian is inside a marriage where God is not invited to rule. You will think you are safe because you love each other, but love without grace decays. Only grace keeps love alive." Teresa also addressed the objection that came up again and again. What if one spouse refuses? She said, "Pray anyway. Kneel beside your bed, even if your husband will not join you. Pray for him. Pray that his heart softens. Do not nag. Do not shame. Just pray. And trust that God is working even when you cannot see it." She told a story about a woman in Burgos whose husband mocked her for kneeling every night. He said it was a waste of time. He said she was becoming a fanatic, but she did not stop. She prayed for him every single night for 4 years. Then he fell from a horse. The injury was severe. He lay in bed for weeks, unable to work, unable to move. The pain was constant. One night, in desperation, he asked his wife to pray for him. She knelt beside the bed. She took his hand. She prayed the Our Father out loud. He wept. He said he felt something break inside him, not physically, spiritually. He said it was like a door he had kept locked for years suddenly opened and light poured in. From that night on, he prayed with her, every single night, until he died 12 years later at the age of 56. Teresa said that woman's faithfulness had saved her husband's soul. She said God honors persistence, especially when it is rooted in love. But she also said this: if your spouse refuses to pray and also refuses to change, you may be living with someone who has chosen darkness. In that case, pray for protection. Pray for your children. And do not let their refusal to seek God stop you from seeking him yourself. Teresa was not naive. She knew that some marriages were violent, some were abusive, some involved betrayal that cut so deep it seemed impossible to heal. She did not tell women to stay in danger. She told them to seek safety first, then to pray. But she also said that even the worst marriage could be redeemed if both people were willing to kneel before God and ask for his help. She said she had seen it happen. Marriages that looked dead, couples who hated each other, then one moment of humility, one decision to try, and God moved. In 1673, a Spanish bishop named Don Fernando de Aragon wrote a pastoral letter to his diocese urging married couples to adopt Teresa's practice. He said marriages that had been lifeless for decades came back to life. He said it was not uncommon for couples to weep during their first week of praying together as years of buried pain and resentment surfaced and were healed. The letter circulated widely. Copies reached Madrid, Lisbon, Naples, and Vienna. By the early 1700s, it had become standard teaching in many Catholic regions, and the results kept coming. Letters, testimonies, stories of transformation that defied natural explanation. In 1721, a French nobleman named Marguerite de Beaumont wrote to her sister describing what happened after she and her husband began praying together. They had been married for 16 years. On the surface, everything was fine, but underneath, they were strangers. They spoke only about logistics. She said she felt like she was living with a business partner, not a husband. Her confessor gave her Teresa's instruction. They knelt together that first night. It felt stiff, formal, but they kept going. By the 10th night, her husband took her hand without her asking. By the 20th night, he started adding his own prayers. He thanked God for her. Marguerite said she cried that night, from relief. 3 months later, their marriage felt new. She said the practice had become the anchor of their life. She ended the letter with a line that Teresa herself could have written: "If you want to save your marriage, stop trying to fix your spouse. Kneel beside them and let God fix you both." Teresa's writings on marriage were eventually compiled and published. The first major edition appeared in 1703, over a century after her death. It included her letters to married couples, her spiritual instructions, and the account of Alonso and Catalina. The book spread across Europe and into the New World. By the mid-18th century, the practice was so widespread that it appeared in popular devotional manuals. One such manual, published in 1749 in Bavaria, included a chapter titled How Husband and Wife Should Pray Together. It cited Teresa extensively. It gave step-by-step instructions. It included testimonies from couples who had tried it and found their marriages transformed. But then came the French Revolution, the Napoleonic Wars, the secularization of Europe. Religious practice declined. Convents were closed. Priests were exiled. The cultural memory of practices like joint marital prayer began to fade. By the late 19th century, many Catholics had never heard of it. Marriage was seen as a civil contract. Prayer was private. The idea that a husband and wife should kneel together every night seemed quaint, old-fashioned, unnecessary. But the practice never fully died. Small pockets of families kept it alive, rural villages, traditional communities, families who had passed it down through generations. And in the 20th century, something remarkable happened. The practice began to revive. In 1925, a French priest named Father Henri Caffarel founded the Teams of Our Lady, a movement for married couples focused on prayer and spiritual growth. He had read Teresa's writings. He built the entire movement around the principle that marriage is a path to holiness and that joint prayer is essential. By 1950, Teams of Our Lady had spread to over 30 countries. Thousands of couples were gathering monthly to pray together, to share their struggles, to support each other. The practice Teresa taught in 1563 was alive again. In 1965, during the Second Vatican Council, the bishops issued a document on marriage called Gaudium et Spes. It emphasized that marriage is a vocation, that spouses help each other become holy, and that prayer is essential to a Christian marriage. Teresa's influence was clear, though her name was not mentioned. By the 1980s, Catholic marriage prep programs around the world had begun, including joint prayer as a core component. Engaged couples were taught to pray together before their wedding and to continue after. The practice that had nearly been lost was being recovered, and the testimonies kept coming. In 1992, a couple in Ireland wrote to a Catholic magazine describing how joint prayer had saved their marriage after 30 years of distance. In 2006, a couple in the Philippines published a book about their experience, citing Teresa as their inspiration. In 2015, a priest in Brazil started a ministry for married couples based entirely on the practice of kneeling together every night. The pattern repeated across centuries and continents. Simple practice, profound results, lives changed, families healed, souls saved. In the archives of the Discalced Carmelites in Rome, there is a small notebook that once belonged to Teresa. It contains notes she made during prayer. On one page, written in her own hand, is a single line: "A marriage that prays together builds a house demons cannot enter." Below it, in smaller script, she added, "I have seen this. I have seen Christ stand between them. I have seen the light." That notebook was cataloged in 1961 during a restoration project. The archivist who found it, a Carmelite nun named Sister Maria Gonzalez, wrote in her report that the ink on that page was smudged, as if Teresa had been crying when she wrote it. The page is now displayed in a protective case in the Carmelite Museum in Ávila. Pilgrims come to see it. They read the words. They stand in silence. Some of them are married. Some of them are struggling. Some of them have never prayed with their spouse and do not know how to start. But they leave with the same instruction Teresa gave to Alonso and Catalina in 1563. Kneel together. Pray one Our Father and one Hail Mary. Out loud. Hold hands. Do it every night for 30 days. Simple, concrete, repeatable, and according to Teresa, powerful enough to move heaven.